Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, in response to the ultimatum that's been delivered to us from the European Union, I know, I'm sorry, it's Brexit again, but we simply can't get away from it, and I promise you, this is the last time we're going to discuss what Britain's divorce bill should be for some weeks, but we've been told, have we not, by Mr Barnier and Mr Juncker and Mr Tusk, not one of them, of course, elected. We've been told by all of them that we have to cough up a lot of money. We have to let them know by the 1st of December whether we're meeting their demands or, when it comes to the big leaders' summit on the 14th and 15th of December in Brussels, they won't allow a discussion about any future trade deal. Well, in response to this, the Prime Minister has met this afternoon with her Brexit War Cabinet. So it's been the Prime Minister, Damien Green, yeah, he's still there, Philip Hammond, Amber Rudd, Boris Johnson, David Davis, Liam Fox, Greg Clark, Michael Gove and Gavin Williamson. And they've been tucked away in Downing Street this afternoon discussing what to do. Not a word so far has come out of the meetings, but the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, did indicate before the meeting that the government was on the brink of unblocking the Brexit negotiations, and that, it would seem, means that we're on the verge of upping by a further 20 billion euros the amount we're prepared to pay before we even enter into negotiations. And already there are some rumblings. Henry Smith, Tory MP for Crawley, has said, as Germany struggles to form a government, now is not the time for the UK to offer more money than our obligations that are due. Robert Halfon, a Conservative MP, said that the public would go bananas if the UK offered more than 40 billion euros. And our old friend on this show, Peter Bone, said he wouldn't pay as much as £1 to leave the European Union. So, the question that I'm asking you is very simple. Will you put up with a Brexit bill if it's 40 billion or more? If, like me, you think it's outrageous, unnecessary, and we should not even be contemplating paying this sum of money, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you view the European Union as being very greedy and very bullying, in which case text to 84850, or perhaps you think, frankly, we have no alternative, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me live on Facebook from here in London and comment there too. My view on this, really very straightforward. Let's have a quick look at the European Union today, shall we? Germany in crisis. Merkel unable to form a government and perhaps another election coming soon. France, support for Macron. The great new hope for French and European politics collapsing as people are defecting away from his party already. In Italy, a recent election in Sicily saw Berlusconi and the Northern League, between them, both quite Eurosceptic parties, get 75% of the vote between them. In Poland, we're on the verge of the European Union taking sanctions against Poland for changes they've made in their judicial system. In Spain, with Catalonia, we see a country with its biggest constitutional crisis since the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. In Hungary, we have a premier who is attacking the European Union and its migrant policy in a language we've never heard from a European leader. And recent elections in Austria and the Czech Republic saw the Eurosceptic right surge forward. I mean, so much so that the Czech Republic now has a billionaire businessman as their new premier. And I could go on with country after country. Sweden, for example, where a political party with a very extreme far-right history is now leading the opinion polls. Everywhere I look, I see opposition to the European project growing. I see a European Union that I think is in deeper crisis right now than it's ever been. And in the face of that, apparently the Prime Minister is contemplating, having blinked already in Florence and promised up to 20 billion, she's contemplating double that amount of money. None of this was mentioned in the general election, was it, that we had just 5 months ago. I think the whole thing is wholly unacceptable. And I've got Phil from Basildon, who's a new caller to the show. Phil, will you, as a member of the public, put up with a bill of this size, or do we have no option?
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Good evening.
Honour to speak to you.
Well, that's very sweet of you.
Would just like you to tell us if you've got an opinion. Is there any politician left in the Conservative Party with a backbone that can say no to these people?
Well, that is actually an extremely good question, and I'm actually stumbling for an answer. Well, look, there are plenty of people on the backbenches. I mentioned Peter Bone already. Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, thinks this is a wholly unacceptable bill for us to pay. So, yeah, there are people out there with backbone. What gets me, Phil, is this Prime Minister, in her Lancaster House speech, if you remember, back in January of this year, and I sat and listened to it. I listened to what she said. I listened to the determination that appeared to be in her voice, and Phil, I praised her to the rooftops on this show that evening, but frankly, with first contact with the enemy, she's failed, hasn't she?
She's gone down the slopes. She's off-piste. She is going down and down. I worked all my career for a German car manufacturer.
Yep.
And I know, and I told everybody at the start of this, on the Friday when we voted to come out, they will be quaking in their shoes.
Of course, because this market matters to them, doesn't it?
Market.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet nobody has covered up on this or even got really much of a mention in the papers. And even a few weeks ago I heard on your programme a chap saying that they're insolvent in Brussels.
Yes, that was one of their accountants who'd been fired recently for pointing out some inconvenient truths. No, Phil, that's right. I mean, Phil, do you see a Brexit divorce bill of any kind that would be acceptable?
Can she not see that she's got all the bargaining power?
No, she can't. No, she can't. She can't. So, Phil, if, let's just say that she does agree to this gargantuan figure of 40 billion, do you think she could survive as Prime Minister, having offered that?
I hope and pray she can't, and I will never vote Conservative again.
Phil, you couldn't have been clearer. Thank you very much indeed. Paul on Facebook says, you helped start this lunacy, stop complaining. I didn't campaign for a Brexit divorce bill. I didn't campaign for terms like hard Brexit and soft Brexit. I certainly didn't campaign for transitional arrangements. I campaigned, Paul, for us to leave. Full stop. End of. Taking back control of our nation and our country. I'd love us to have a grown-up, sensible trade deal with our European neighbours, but they're the ones putting the obstacles up. Steve says 40 billion is 35 billion too much. Well, Steve, a little bit of polling on this. So YouGov, in September, did some extensive polling asking the public what were they prepared to pay for us to leave the European Union. And it was found that a bill of 20 billion was deemed to be unacceptable by 63%. Paying up to 5 billion to cover our spending commitments we made whilst we were still members was acceptable to 38%. So just about on 5 billion, kind of near a majority of the country would agree to it. But 63% then said 20 billion was too much. And I bet you, if we put the figure of 40 billion or more to them, I bet you 80% plus of the British public would say we should simply not be paying out this vast sum of money. For the record, we should not agree to any further payment. We should walk away and call their bluff, is what I get by text. David is calling me from Liss in Hampshire. David, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Nigel, if I take my car in the garage and the guy gives me a bill for £1,200 but says, I'm not going to tell you how it's calculated, but we want £1,200, well, anyone would complain about that. And it seems to me that I feel better. I mean, Mrs May, she offers 20 billion. No, that's not good enough. All right, then it's 40 billion. I mean, how do they calculate these figures?
Well, David...
You see, I'd feel happier with Mrs May if she said, well, you know, it's 6 billion for this, 7 billion for that, 200,000 for this, 300,000 for that. But it's always around billion, isn't it?
David, I asked Barnier face-to-face in the European Parliament. I said, it seems to me you are plucking these figures out of the air, virtually at random. Can you please tell me how any of this is calculated? Answer there came none. And also, David, you may remember, I wrote to Monsieur Barnier after the three Remainers, you know, Kenneth Clarke, Nick Clegg, Lord Adonis, went to the Berlimon building, went to his office, went for meetings, and I wrote to Barnier to say, I'd like to meet you, because I think you need to hear the voice of the 17.4 million people. And to date, we've been unable to even agree a meeting. So, David, I'm with you. This is being plucked out of the air at random. The trouble is that the Prime Minister in Florence blinked. She said we'd be prepared to pay up to 20 billion. And, David, my feeling is that if you show weakness to a bully, they come back for more. That's what I think.
And now we've doubled it. Or we pay 40 billion. So why stop at that? Why not make it 45, 50? I mean, where the hell is the limit?
Do you know something? I bet you, David, David, if we offer 40, they'll say they want 60.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course they will.
What would you do, David?
Go on holiday.
Well, apart from that, I mean,
what would I do? Goodness, I accept. I can see the logic that we owe something for commitments that we've said that, in all honesty and all decency, we've agreed. But I just can't see where these £1 billion. That's £1,000 million. I mean, we just throw it away as a word. Oh, it's $1 billion. But that's £1,000 million.
We're talking about 40 of them.
Yeah, 40,000 million pounds we want.
Yeah.
We don't want 38,682,000,000.
I know. David, I tell you what, if this goes to 40 billion, I wonder whether she could survive a vote in the House of Commons on this issue. I really, really do. David, I thank you for your call. And Russell's got it right on Facebook. Russell says, let's just call it what it is, a ransom. He's not wrong. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. As the Prime Minister considers doubling our Brexit bill, I'm asked on Twitter by Concerned, why didn't you tell us about this before the referendum, Nigel? Did you know about it? Of course I didn't know about it. It's an invention. Yes, we have some spending commitments out to 2020, but we also have shares and assets in the club. Seems to me calling it quits would make sense. What is happening here is the British government, frankly, is being blackmailed. A ransom is being demanded of us. And all of this is happening at a time, and I've said this earlier this evening, when the European Union itself is in real fundamental trouble. Just look at Mutti, Mother Merkel, 4 times seemed to be the winner of German elections, the strongest leader in the European Union, and now, because a Eurosceptic party called AfD has completely upset the apple cart by winning 94 seats in Parliament, she cannot form a coalition government. It looks tonight, although we're on the verge of Germany holding another fresh set of elections to try and find a coalition that can be put together. And do you know what will happen if there's a set of elections? We'll go to the big summit. Theresa May will be there on the 14th and 15th of December, and we'll be told, oh, well, I'm sorry, but we can't make any decision on Brexit because Germany hasn't got a settled government. And do you know what, folks? That's one of the reasons we voted Brexit, so that we're not beholden upon foreign parliaments and foreign governments, and we must not allow them to use this card to delay us. A key problem I get on Twitter with the Brexit divorce bill is that awarding the EU anything in advance desperately weakens our negotiating position. You're absolutely right, it does. Look, what Barnier is saying is pay up and look big, whether it's 40 billion or 60 billion or whatever it is he's demanding. It sounds like it's 60 billion, actually. You pay us 60 billion, and you know what? When you've done that, we might just have a constructive conversation with you. Is there any man or woman listening to this show that thinks that is potentially a good business deal? It's not. It's crackers, in my opinion. I wonder what Jim in Wandsworth thinks. Good evening, Jim.
Hi, Nigel. I've got kind of 2 hats on this. I would go into this meeting and say we're prepared to pay 30 billion, but this is what we want. Because Theresa May is in a position of strength now with the weakness of Merkel.
Absolutely.
And what's going on in Italy. So when you're negotiating, you should always come from a position of strength. And I think now is the turning point. And just say what we want, what we're going to offer you for this 30 billion is that you can have free trade with us. And in return, we'll have free trade with you. We will give European travellers and people working in the UK equal rights that you can give UK citizens in Europe.
So, Jim, what you're saying is that you would be prepared to pay a large sum of money, provided a deal was tied into it.
The deal absolutely has to be tied into it. You don't offer money and get nothing in return.
But that, Jim, is what we're potentially doing now, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's if we go in. Yes, you're absolutely right. We cannot do that. I'm sitting back here thinking, my goodness, it's as though they're like the apprentices on The Apprentice in front of Alan Sugar. They're a load of rubbish, you know. And each week somebody should say, "You're fired, you're fired, you're fired."
Or, of course, in America, of course, it was Donald Trump, not Alan Sugar, wasn't it, in the same programme?
Anyway, the other side of it would be to say to them, "Look, we've offered you this deal. If you don't want to, not us asking for a deal, this is what we're offering you." And if they don't take it, I would say that's the end of it. And then when Article 50 runs its time, say now we can start negotiating. But more, as importantly today, Nigel, the Telegraph said, and I'll quote it to you, Europe will reject a UK trade deal if Britain cuts EU red tape after Brexit. So this is after the possible 50, 60 billion.
Yeah.
Warns Michael Barnier. So they keep moving the goalposts.
So they're saying that if we want to have a free trade deal afterwards, we won't be able to make our own laws in any area of our commercial life. They don't seem to understand, Jim, in Brussels, that we voted to leave. And leaving means we make our own laws. Jim, I am increasingly of the view that we are wasting our time with these people, that they don't actually want a deal. They want to string this out. They want it to be an agonising process. They actually think in Brussels, you know, that they will cause such discord amongst the political class in Britain that we'll change our minds on Brexit. That is what they think, Jim.
Well, you're absolutely right. But I think when you're coming to negotiation, I wonder if any of these people dealing with Brussels have done big business deals.
Oh, Jim.
Come from a position of weakness.
Jim, don't be silly. Oh, come on, do grow up, Jim. You don't actually think people in politics have ever worked in business, do you?
Well, listen, they're doing deals with... They're doing... Well, listen, you're in a studio. What did you do before, Nigel?
Hang on a second, Jim. I had a proper job. I worked for 20 years in the private sector, all right?
No, I know you did. Well, the point I was trying to make is that you have a track record. That's my point. You've done business. You know how to negotiate. But some of these people come straight from university. They become secretaries or backup people or researchers for these MPs, and they have no knowledge of business. Some time ago, or some months ago, I met somebody who was on the negotiating team for the government. And when I spoke to him, I could not believe how naive he was. And I said to him, let me give you a few lessons on negotiation. And he said to me, do you know what? I'm going to take that on board. I swear to you.
Where did you meet him, Jim?
Well, I drive a London taxi. I picked him up in the cab.
Okay.
I picked him up virtually outside the Houses of Parliament. And I said, I thought he may have been an MP. I said, have you had a late sit-in? He said, no. He said, I work in the Treasury. I'm on the negotiating team. Nigel, I could not tell you how green this guy was. And I said to him, you've got to come from a position of strength, not weakness. Don't keep asking what you want. You tell them what they're going to get.
Jim, brilliant. And you know what? I think, and I said this a moment ago, I think people like you, out there, running their own businesses, doing their own thing, taking their own risk, know that you don't offer a big sum of money, you don't offer any sum of money, unless you've got something in return for it. Jim, I thank you very much indeed for that call. Dennis is calling me from Bournemouth. Good evening, Dennis.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, are you happy for us to, shell over 40 billion in the hope that Mr. Barnier might be nice to us?
I'm not at all, and I'd like to talk to you about that. Could I just spend a couple of minutes pointing out something that I've seen on a recording of the ITV programme this morning, today.
Yeah.
It was stated on there, Ben Fogle was on it, a family friend who was an animal expert was on it. Mm-hmm. Philip Schofield said that because of Brexit, dogs in this country would no longer have protection under something called sentience, and that Michael Gove had said that he would not allow a transfer of European law for the protection of dogs to transfer to the UK statute book, meaning that dogs could be put down very easily. And it's just an example of project here, and I just wanted to fit that in and let you know about that.
Yeah, the other story about pets was that if we leave the European Union, we can't take our pets to France on holiday with us. I mean, it's all fear stories, Dennis, isn't it, the whole thing? It's rather like that amazing story 2 weeks ago where Sir Vince Cable was saying, isn't it awful? 10,000 EU nurses have left the National Health Service without telling us that in the same year 13,000 had joined. So there's a whole load of scare stories. So Dennis, we're in this position. They've given us an ultimatum. If you were in charge, what would you do?
One final thing on the story I've just said to you. After this had been said on there, the programme was cut off for about 5 minutes. I've no idea why. Maybe somebody pulled the plug. Just moving on.
Yep.
We did speak before on this, and I spoke to you about that the agenda in the first place was wrong because of the 3 points, and trade should have been in there from the start. But that's passed, and we discussed that. Now, I've been involved in several negotiations as a businessman, and one thing we always tried to achieve in a negotiation was you had objectives or part objectives. If we got any of those part objectives achieved, unconditionally, we trousered them. We used to call it a stake in the ground. Now, the European Union have had the 20 billion offer. Mm-hmm. They put a stake in the ground. They said, right, we've got that. Mm-hmm. That's secure. Right now we'll push for more. And that's exactly what's going on. You should never, in a negotiation, offer anything unconditionally.
Which is exactly what Theresa May did in Florence. She blinked, didn't she? She blinked, and the bully boys, as I see them, want more. So, Dennis, we're in a bit of trouble with it. She's in trouble, isn't she?
She's in big trouble because she now has she feels she's got an obligation that she's got to offer more. She's offered something. They've trousered. They'll say they've accepted it.
Yep.
They'll push her for more.
They will.
And this will go on and on. It's all jammed tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, that's if Dennis, she stays as leader. And, and I hear all this stuff that the Tory party is going to be loyal and stick with her, but I'm not convinced. Dennis from Bournemouth, I thank you. Wayne on Facebook has got a grand idea. Offer 30 billion, but it goes down by $1 billion a week until we reach a deal. And Daniel says, Theresa must show more steel in these negotiations. And I think, Daniel, increasingly, the British public take that view too. We don't like to see our Prime Minister being pushed around, particularly by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. As Prime Minister May considers doubling the contribution we're prepared to pay for Brexit, I'm asking you whether you find that sum of money acceptable. Thus far, few of you do. But before I get back to that, I've got a visitor with me this evening. I've got Governor Phil Bryant, Republican Governor from Mississippi. He's been on my show before. Welcome to London.
Thank you, Nigel. So great to be back. Good to see you as always.
I know that you're a very, very pro the British-American link.
Absolutely.
In terms of military and in terms of trade and everything else. And you were quite a cheerleader for Brexit, actually.
We were.
When it happened back in 2016.
I knew how important it was going to be to not only Great Britain, but to the U.S.
When you look at the negotiations and you see the attitude that's being taken by Brussels and the response from the British Prime Minister, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. It's hard for Americans to grasp this. Apparently, Brussels still is trying to tell you, even after the vote by the people of Great Britain, that they're going to decide what Great Britain will do. And now there's this talk of how much ransom you're going to pay. And that's kind of like, what it is. I mean, if you pay us enough, you're going to be able to leave. This is Great Britain. You don't need their permission to do anything. That's the way Americans look at it, and I know that people that I talk to are so eager about seeing Brexit come into fruition because we believe that the United States, all of North America, Canada, Mexico, all are looking forward to building stronger trade, greater alliances with Great Britain, get us back to the future, as I tell people, to where we once were, where Great Britain and the United States stood strong together in trade and in defense.
Well, as you say, this is dragging on, and I think we have sent a bit of a message to the world when we talk about transition arrangements and everything else that we're not really going to be open for business for a long time, which I regret. Now, you've got a new ambassador here in London, and I understand a new embassy about to open. So
Absolutely.
tell us about that.
Well, of course, he is a remarkable guy. The president has such great confidence in Woody, and as you hear that term used...
This is Woody Johnson, isn't it?
Absolutely, Woody Johnson, Ambassador Johnson, and I was going to say people refer to him as Woody, even in Washington, because he's a down-to-earth, real guy that believes in the relationship between Great Britain and the United States, as I do, as the president does, as frankly, vast majority of Americans do. This is something, as we saw Brexit, there was a celebration. I remember telling then candidate Donald Trump, we were in New York at Trump Towers together shortly after that, and I said, this is your first win, Mr. Trump. This indicates to me that you will be successful, because there were a lot of the same ideas behind Brexit. And I remind people, we used to have this course in college called Western Civilization, Western Civ, and we studied the great things that the English-speaking people in Western civilizations and some of the challenges that we had. It was not perfect, but I think there's a movement of another great Western civilization, and this should be our decade for Great Britain and America, again, to help lead the world.
Now, it's very interesting to watch Donald Trump. His first overseas visit was to Riyadh. Since then, he's been to China and kind of walked around looking like he owned the place. He's been to, what's true,
Vietnam.
He's been everywhere. I mean, he even, President Macron, not a supporter of the Trump agenda at all, and yet on Bastille Day, Trump was the guest of honor, full state visit. He's been to Warsaw, had the same treatment, and yet, despite saying great things about this country, despite being pro-Brexit, despite being positive about trade, there's been no invitation at all to the president to come here on a state visit. Does he feel a bit insulted?
I think he does. He would not say it because he is a gentleman, and you and I know, you and I have been around him. He's a big personality. When he walks into the room, if you've got your back to him, you can feel the air rushing out of the room as people say, there's the president, there's Donald Trump. But of course he would love to come over here. He'd love to meet the wonderful people of Great Britain, encourage them with a further relationship with the United States. And I don't understand, as you see him going, as I saw the children in China with just the sheer glee of seeing a president there applauding, and in Vietnam, and we obviously have had a history there in Vietnam, how he was welcomed. I think Europe's going to have to adjust to the fact that Donald J. Trump's going to be president for this term and hopefully another one, and he wants to work.
I mean, the argument was that if he came to London, there'd be thousands of protesters, and that was a reason not to come. But, I mean, is he really put off by protesters?
No, of course not. This president's not scared. It doesn't bother him at all. But I think what he probably is concerned about is how that would affect your city of London. I've told him, go outside of London. It doesn't mean you have to be in London. There's other wonderful places throughout Great Britain that you would have, I think, a really supporting crowd. It would be like going to New York or Los Angeles, one of our big cities, where the liberals are in charge. And a lot of times you see a decaying infrastructure, terrible crime problem, homelessness in these big cities, because the Democrats have used that social engineering program to cause that. So I hope he certainly comes here. I think it'll be a great day for Britons, particularly outside of London.
Well, it's kind of, it seems to me he may have visited the rest of the world before he comes here. And that's upsetting. So, I mean, obviously, I've been hopeful, Phil, for a trade deal between our countries. And I know that Brexit taking a long time is putting this off. But just talk a little bit about trade, a little bit about business. I mean, we're a year in. Or it's a year since he was elected, and hey, he's had some problems. He's had some difficulties.
Sure.
He's had rebellions in his own party on Capitol Hill. You've got this special investigation, exposing one or two people who were part of a team in the early days of the campaign. I mean, is he going to get tax reform through?
Absolutely. And what a lot of people don't realize is what's happening on an international level as you see him travel. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I was at the UAE. I met with the Crown Prince there in Saudi Arabia. they love Donald Trump. They know Donald Trump represents a strong, determined leader for the West. They haven't seen that in a while, and so as I sat and talked with the Crown Prince that evening, and he said, if America will help, the United States will help us, we will defeat ISIS. We will defeat the Taliban. So Saudi Arabia is there. I was in India 2 weeks ago. A great support for the president. When I get outside of the United States...
But he has to get support in Washington, doesn't he?
He does.
And, let's be fair, he really has had some problems with his own party.
I think if you look at Great Britain, what happens. I mean, we have a lot of Democrats in very powerful positions, particularly in the House and Senate, and we have Republicans who are so nervous about this great change away from the establishment. They were comfortable. They all had great parking places and big offices. They had lots of money. They were imperial powers in Washington, D.C., and in came a businessman that said, we're going to stop all of that. We're going to start worrying about the people of the United States, the men and women in the middle class that need our help, that has not seen, we've not seen really economic growth in the last 8, maybe 10 years. And he came in like a whirlwind. Now we're at 3% growth. Job numbers are higher than they've ever been. In Mississippi, we're at 4.9% unemployment, lowest has been in Mississippi's entire history. And as I travel the world, I see world leaders that believe in what this president is doing, and in fact are trying to emulate some of the ideas that he has in place. You're going to see a lowering of the tax rate from 35 to 20% very soon. The House has already passed that bill. I think the Senate will take it up. You're going to see a lot of reshoring of businesses that are coming from around the world back home again, and Mississippi is one of the areas that's happening in. He's been in 1 year.
And what's the next big challenge for Trump? I mean, is it reforming the Republican Party actually as big a battle as taking on the Democrats?
It is, and what he's doing all of this at the same time. So he's trying to end Obamacare, and there's a provision in there that Leader McConnell put in that would stop the tax of people who are paying for Obamacare and do not wish to. He is trying to cut taxes in the U.S. He is getting rid of regulations. He is reaching out to countries all over the world. This man doesn't sleep. He doesn't stop. But his great challenge is to get people to understand that he's playing chess on a 3-board level. And he is doing remarkable things all at one time, and he has every confidence in the world he's going to be able to accomplish those.
Interesting. And finally, and something that's going to fascinate our listeners and people in this country, the Royal Commonwealth Society, established back in 1868, an organisation that reaches out to the Commonwealth of Nations, 52 countries.
52 nations.
Right across the world, with this common previous link with the British. But there's been, as I understand it, a Royal Commonwealth Society office has opened in the USA. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. And Jackson, Mississippi, we will have an affiliate office of the Royal Commonwealth Society. When I came here, I believe it was last May, I met with Michael Lake, and we started talking about the Commonwealth and how I'd always looked at it as something that could be a great economic driver, because we've got 52 nations, and if we started working together, not only on education, we'll be tomorrow at Buckingham Palace on the Queen's essay competition. So that's something for literacy that we're looking to, and we'll have one in the United States. But if we try to do all the right things for the countries of the Commonwealth, include grow their economy by reaching out from the United States and Great Britain and saying there are economic opportunities that we can all share, this will be a great global chamber of commerce.
Does it sort of say that maybe the arguments that you had with George III and the White Hat and the burning down in 1812.
We put those aside, absolutely.
Has that been kind of put back? And really, I think, honestly, I think people will be amazed by that piece of news.
Sure.
Governor Brandt, thank you once again for coming here
good to see
and
you.
talking to me on LBC. Thank you very much indeed. Well, there we are. The Royal Commonwealth Society in Jackson, Mississippi. Who would have believed it? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. Our divorce bill doubles to $40 billion. Is it acceptable to you? David on Facebook says, I suspect, or rather I hope, that May is playing a clever game here. Well, David, if she is, I can't see what it is, because we'll be making an offer in the hope they'll have constructive trade agreements with us. And yet, as a caller mentioned earlier, Barnier is already saying that to have a trade agreement, we would have to keep exactly the same rules and regulations as all the other European Union members. We shouldn't pay a bean for that. Surely the whole point of leaving is the ability to make our own laws and perhaps become a bit more competitive. At least that's what I would have thought. Patrick in Battersea is my next caller. Should we pay 40 billion, Patrick, or should we put it up to 60 perhaps in a few weeks' time?
Pay the 40 billion.
Just pay it, yeah?
Yeah, just pay it. We've got no hope of, having any connection with the EU if we don't, because if we don't pay it, what's going to happen to our standing in the world? We're just going to get taken to court. We're going to have a...
No.
We will be defaulting on a debt, pretty much.
No, well, there is no debt in writing of any kind at all. There is a spending commitment, Patrick, I grant you, out to the end of 2020, which, incidentally, I've always argued that bit of it we should honour, but we should net it off against our assets. But, Patrick, if she goes for 40 billion, let's say, what happens when nice Mr. Barnier says, well, that's jolly good? And I really think the British are being terribly constructive. All they now need to do is to make it 60 billion, and we'll start talking. What do we do then?
I don't know. The problem we have is we have no cards to play at all. At all.
Well, we do actually, because we import £70 billion worth of goods more every single year from them than the other way around. That's quite a powerful card. The fact that there are millions of people in Europe who manufacture products that we buy, that's quite a powerful card, isn't it?
Nigel, I travel to and from Europe very, very frequently bringing goods.
Yeah.
Right? Let me tell you, we do not compete with the 28 other states that send us stuff. We need them more than they need us. Let me tell you that from now. Because if we walk away, particularly if we walk away without a deal, our trucks go nowhere. Our planes go nowhere.
So how does the rest of the world cope, Patrick? How do trucks go around the rest of the world? How do aeroplanes go from Canada to the United States of America? I mean, it works everywhere else.
Nigel, they have agreements to fly over airspace.
Yeah.
The morning after we walk away with no deal, if that should happen, we don't fly any planes over Ireland, over France, over any European country.
Do you really believe that? Do you really believe?
Absolute fact.
Do you really believe? So,
check it.
So they'll allow China to fly planes over their airspace. They'll allow every country in the world, maybe not North Korea, but they'll allow every country in the world to fly over their airspace, and yet their biggest trading partner in the world, they would say you can't fly our aeroplanes over our space.
Nigel, we're not their biggest trading partner in the world. The problem we have is that those countries would have had an agreement to fly over EU space. We would not in that case. That's the point I'm trying to make.
But don't you think, at the end of the day, Patrick, politics and business, that actually businesses and pragmatism, human beings get things done, don't they?
Really? You looked at Zimbabwe recently?
Well, I think we should hang our heads in shame, Patrick, over Zimbabwe, because, frankly, we allowed a lot of that to happen. But human beings get things done. I mean, you're painting this vision that if we don't cough up, pay up, that somehow aeroplanes won't fly, trade won't continue, we will just be a country that is not part of political union, and life will go on. And there may be a couple of inconveniences. We may have a tariff issue. But hey, you just heard, albeit, a very strong friend and supporter of President Trump's, but there is, a senior US politician telling us they're desperate to have a trade deal with us. And I've heard much the same from Japan, heard much the same from Australia. There are lots of other opportunities, surely, Patrick, out there.
Yeah, I give you Bombardier on that point and what they did to us with that.
Well, doesn't that just show doesn't that absolutely highlight why we need to have a deal?
No, it highlights what America will do to us. Well, America will do what is best for them, not best for us.
Right. So Europe,
the Americans.
So Europe will do what's best for us, will they?
Europe will do what's best for themselves.
So same thing.
That would not be best for us if we leave, and we're leaving. So why would they do anything that's good for us?
They don't want to do anything that's good for us because they can see that politically opposition to the European project is now at the highest it's ever been across the Union, and they fear that if we're seen to have walked away in an unpunished way, that other countries will want to follow. So I think, Patrick, we've actually reached the point where we need to give them the ultimatum and not the other way around.
Nigel, It doesn't matter what the reasons are. It doesn't matter anything else. The point is they're going to do what's best for them because we are no longer in their club. The Americans are going to do what's best for them because we have never been in a club with them.
Well, why don't we do what's best for us then, Patrick? Why don't we do what's best for us?
Would have been to stay in the EU, Nigel. That is my point.
But, well,
that's my view.
So are you one of those people, Patrick, that thinks we need to have a referendum to reverse this?
No, I'm not.
You're not.
We've done it now, so let's go for it. But the problem we have is when we get things like, saboteurs and all that nonsense, when you knew full well our Supreme Court would have to rule, and you knew full well that if you want our Parliament to have sovereignty, that we should have our Parliament have sovereignty over any Brexit decisions, you didn't want to admit that until Gina forced you to admit it one Sunday morning.
Well, I don't know about that, Patrick, but I'll tell you what I do know. And that is that we voted to leave, and that, we should meet our commitments up to the end of 2020. We should net that off against our investments in the Union, and that if this Prime Minister starts agreeing to a ransom of 40 billion or 60 billion in return for no firm promises, I doubt she can even stay as Prime Minister. Patrick, I understand your point of view. Patrick there from Battersea, very negative, very worried, thinks the planes will stop flying. I don't believe the world works like that at all. Charlotte from the Forest of Dean, how much would you pay, Charlotte, if you were in charge?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing?
Absolutely nothing. No. I fully believe in what Jacob Rees-Mogg and others have been saying, that we owe these people nothing. And I think she capitulated at Florence, which made me very angry. Yep. And I think that we shouldn't have even capitulated. But then I've always suspected her to be, to be pro-EU and a globalist anyway. So she's going to give them money. But I don't think we owe them a penny.
And what about the cliff edge, Charlotte? This terrible cliff edge, and our previous caller from Battersea saying that if we leave without a deal, they won't let us fly aeroplanes over their space. I mean, do you fear the end of the world if we leave without a deal?
No, definitely not. And as far as I'm concerned, the EU is imploding on itself, Nigel. You know it.
I think it is.
Every sane person in this country.
I think it is. And these negotiations, Charlotte, they're for the benefit of Brussels, not for the member states, the companies, or the workers. Charlotte, I thank you. And quickly, Chris, my last caller of the evening from Surbiton, new caller to the show. How do you see it, Chris?
Well, I think it's disgraceful. I mean, I voted to remain, but I can't wait to leave. Because the way this carry on and this nonsense and this 40 billion, well, I just don't understand it, Nigel.
Nor do I.
How can they prove that? Where would that money go? What's it going to do? How's that going to benefit anybody?
Chris, is what's changed your mind their behaviour in Brussels?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why do I want to be a part of something like that? And a few of my friends have drawn to this conclusion. We all voted to remain because obviously it suited our business. We thought it was going to affect our business. It turns out, okay, we've done very well out of it so far, thus far, fingers crossed. But moving forward, I just don't want any part of it now, and I want out. And I owe you an apology, sir, for that, because I wrote to mate. And you did say about it, and,
no one in a democracy, Chris, owes anybody an apology. They do what they think is the right thing at the time. But your call is fascinating. I thank you for it. And I know that across this country there are quite a few Chris's, quite a few people who voted Remain who would now vote differently. Look, my final thought on all of this is if the Prime Minister gives in to this ransom demand and agrees to 40 billion, I think the country will find that completely and totally unacceptable. They are making up the rules in Brussels as they go along, and we, I'm afraid, are looking weaker and weaker with every single day that passes. You've been listening